I got so pissed at that I.
Thanks, Tej. So this that you've heard talk of isn't something else, isn't somewhere else. Isn't waiting for you to be ready. There is no readiness required. You can't be ready. That's the most wonderful news of all. There is no preparation. There's no possibility of being prepared. I'm not saying the waiting isn't this as well, but whilst there's a sense of waiting, it's kind of like me wants to delay, to postpone the inevitable. And the inevitable is what we're speaking of. This is inevitable. Why? Simply because it is. This is just as it is. Always. Not it will be as it is. Not that it could be as it is. Not that it should be as it is. As it fucking is. Now that is all we're speaking of. I don't know why. I don't know why it's not more obvious. And seemingly for most human beings, it's not obvious at all. What is obvious is what was, what could be, what should be. So this isn't a suggestion of how life might be different. Life is never different from it is. So if there is only life as it is, there really is nowhere to go. There's no journey to take. There's no path to follow. There's no arriving. You don't arrive here. But the sense I always had of me as me was that somehow I got lost. And I was away from home, and I was trying to get back home. I think for most seekers, there's so many ways you can go about that, but certainly for spiritual seekers, there is this sense of being estranged, isolated, once removed from home. And the most wonderful news is that there is no one to be at home. Well, you could say that's the dreadful news, but the dreadful news is the wonderful news. There was no one that could ever leave. So there is no returning. And I don't know how it is for you. I'm guessing that there is this sense of being, or this longing to be at home, to come home. So there is a great sorrow in the impossibility that you could return home, because the sense of your own separate self is the estrangement, is the separation, is the feeling of being apart, of both being apart and being a tiny part in this vast wholeness. And you long to not feel detached, but connected. So the sadness is that there is no possibility of connection, because that's the illusion that I long for. I long to be at one with the lover. Well, there is no apart from the lover. There is only love. But love appears as everything, so it's not always lovely. Love is a dreadful word to use because it sounds like everything is blissful and beautiful and lovely, but there's no exception. And it's probably better that I don't use the word love, or anyone uses the word love ever. It would be better just to say unconditional, which this is, because there aren't any exclusion. None. And yet, there is this most obvious love. And you can use whatever words you want, but life loving itself, this loving itself. And it seems obvious why human beings have made up God, so that they could be at one with God. But without me, there can't be God. Because God is other than me. And there simply is no other than. There's no other without me. Well, thank you all for coming. Seems ages since I've done this. That's ridiculous, I know, but there we go. Just because there's no time doesn't stop you talking about it all the time. You really wouldn't have anything to say at all. Or maybe you would. When I was in Asheville, every time I saw a firefly, which I'd seen in lots of American movies, but never seen one, you do end up going, oh, it's a firefly. Every time I saw one, and that didn't stop happening the whole time I was there. They are miraculous things, though. It is a wonder to see a firefly. Trey and I tried to catch one. We found. So if you want to share anything, just feel free to do that. And if you've got if you've got nagging things to say, like, yeah, that's all very well, they're only being this, but what about, you know, they're the best things to talk about.
Dario has his hand up. Go ahead, Dario.
Well, I was still thinking about if I should raise my hand, but then apparently it happened. Excuse my comment on the post.
No, not at all. It's fine. You're not the only one who said that. Dario, just for everyone else, Dario said, nice to get an invitation in the third person from you, Tim. Because when I post, I don't say I am inviting you. I put Tim as inviting you. I mean, you won't mind speaking about yourself in the third person at all without I. I mean, I's preoccupied with talking about I all the time. You might find yourself doing that quite a bit. Because whether I say Dario or Tim, it makes not shit a difference, really. Could have been Dario inviting me. Have you got a question or something?
Yeah, I got a question. Would you say that when no thing is apparent or clear, that the thingness becomes more apparent as well? Like you said, like the firefly becomes like such a thing.
Would I say the thingness becomes more? Yeah, you could say that, but in a really simplistic, not profoundly, not in a really childlike way. So, yeah. You know, a firefly, you know what kids would be like when they first see a firefly. I mean, every kid who first saw a firefly would be excited. There's no doubt about that. How could you not be? This glowing thing, wonder. And yeah, so I was a bit like that. The thing about thingness is when everything is nothing, the thingness is the same. I mean, thingness doesn't change just because it's nothing. And I think one of the traps of non-duality is, of course, as a seeker, you're waiting until something is very obviously different. You know, I'll see things differently. I will experience things differently. The whole of perception will be absolutely altered. This myth of altered states. I'll be in a different state of consciousness. No, that's not what. Yeah, maybe that's what others are talking about. It's not what I'm speaking about at all. It's that you won't be conscious of being conscious. Consciousness will lose all it, whatever mystery consciousness or states of consciousness, states of awareness, whatever stories you've been enamored with, you've been enthralled by, will just completely die. And there will just be what's happening. and a very simple love of that, a joy of that. It doesn't have to be joy. Could be any reaction at all. I don't think there's any change in perception here at all. In the way things are perceived.
Would you say that the patterns that are occurring are changing? Like behavioral patterns, like
I don't think there's any rules about that. Yeah, because they're just stories. So yeah, stories could occur. That's, I will say, I'm not aware of those changes. Now, other people have told me that there have been changes. They're not changes that I notice. I'll give you an example. I've said it before. Some of you will be bored by my repetition, but I've said it before. One thing that did happen quite early on is I looked at my hand, and it was so obviously not my hand, because it was a hand that had fully grown nails. It had quite long nails on this hand that I was looking at. And I had bitten my nails from early childhood. I was one of those kids that the mum painted that shit on your nails that tasted vile to stop you biting your nails. And I looked at my hand, and initially it wasn't my hand. Then obviously, oh yeah, there's nails. I couldn't have been biting my nails. So their nail biting had stopped. I had no idea that it had stopped. So if there are changes in patterns of behavior or habits, you probably won't even notice. Because the importance of patterns and habits are only important to me, you know, because they're part of my identity, part of my definition of who I am. Without that, you won't give a shit. And you probably won't notice. So any patterns of behavior or habits or the way I behave and the way I respond and react, I have had that pointed out to me by others. But it's interesting, you won't be interested in what others think of you, not in the way that you did as me, because of course that's really important to me, how I'm being perceived by others, that self-consciousness. Is that kind of an answer?
yes.
Because any talk of change is just storytelling. And if somebody says you used to do that and now you do that, you go, oh yeah, I probably did. But it won't mean anything, because your story only means something because it's real, and it's real because it's your real life that is being spoken about. It's you. If it's not you that's being spoken about, you can still tell the stories and you can still engage with that, but in a very light, meaningless, easy, sort of fun kind of, it doesn't really matter kind of way, which is more or less, is quite a good description of why we might call the absence of self the lightness of being. That life is much lighter, as I am the weight, I am the heaviness, I am the seriousness, I am the burden. That I've got to make my life work. Turns out life's not a job. Whoever told us that?
We believed it.
Yeah. I mean, we are terribly, heavily indoctrinated by all the adult selves who think that without your work ethic, you would be an utter failure. Not as a human being, but as a self. You'll be not a successful self. And to most adult selves, that's That's what failure means.
Yeah.
And it is a wonder that what most of the human beings that society, generally the population, calls successful selves are pretty miserable. That's funny. The wealthy ones. That's the most common criteria for success, isn't it? Wealth. The famous ones.
You're famous, Tim.
Yeah, well, if this is fame, then yeah, go for it.
37.
It's all good. Oh, thanks.
I love it to see you.
How lovely that I'm famous. Don't put that burden on me, Dario, for fuck's sake.
I'm sorry.
It's fine. If other people think you're famous or successful, it doesn't matter. It really only matters what you say, what you think about yourself. I am famous because I went in the cafe in the village this morning. Because although I did enjoy the American breakfast, I do like a full English. So I had one of those in the village cafe, and I couldn't help but look at the stand they've got with this famous local author's book on the stand. And it's been there for 18 months. And I stupidly asked, how many have you sold again? I know how many they've sold. None. But the top one is quite well thumbed. So I should be pleased with that, you know, that a few villagers have picked it up, thumbed through it and gone, what the fucking hell is he on about? I've always had my doubts about him, and now they've just been confirmed and put it down again. But I haven't sold one yet in the village. And I don't want to get too grandiose, but Jesus did say something similar about, you know, the locals. And in America, I'm quite a hit. So yeah, you got to travel, haven't you? Funny. Well, the problem is with people who've known you since you were a child, is of course they think they know you. That's the problem with family and long-term friends and the community you grew up in. You know, they've got a fully formed opinion of who you are. And if you step outside of that, they go, oh, he's changed. He's gone off the rails. I think he's lost it. You know, bless him.
That's not like you.
So that's not what?
That's not like you.
Oh, that's not like him. He's really acting out of character. He used to be all right. Oh, you've probably experienced quite a bit of that yourselves, I don't doubt.
Tej. Go ahead, Tej.
Yeah, Tej.
Hey, Tim.
Hi, Tej.
Yeah, how was your Asheville trip? Sorry, I couldn't make it. I really tried hard, but couldn't make it.
Well, we've only got, sorry, how long have we got left? We've only got half an hour. Well, I could tell a story about my trip to Asheville. That would take half an hour. I'll just say that it took me 3 days. It took me 3 days to get to Asheville. So it was quite traumatic. There was a point in the story where I was sitting curled up in the corner in Philadelphia airport, sobbing when my phone wouldn't work. And the next flight after the flight had been cancelled was in 3 days' time. So I thought I was in Philadelphia and I'm not even going to make it to the meetings or anything.
Wow.
But then there was the wonder of the Asheville posse, led by this really crazy woman who calls herself Abby, and she decided it was a good idea to get me an Amtrak train that took 9 hours to go from Philadelphia to Asheville. So that's what I did. So I had the full American experience of Amtrak, which I now realize when telling the story to Americans, none of the Americans have been on a train.
Well, just to let you know, I recently was on Amtrak, but for the first time.
Oh, you've just been on one, yeah.
Yeah.
And I did enjoy it because it's quite social. You know, people chatted to me on the train, and you can get up and go to the cafe car, and yeah, it was an adventure. So it was great. Thanks.
Yeah, great.
Shame you couldn't make it, but they're sitting there. Can you see them? Can you see the 4 of them sitting there? They've already invited me back, so there we go.
Yeah, I think next time definitely. And if you ever plan to come to California, let me know.
Yeah, I will. I would love to come to California. That's, you know.
Well, let's do it then.
Yeah, well, let's do it. Yeah, we'll do it. It's a little bit expensive, but yeah, I'd love to. I've always, if there's one place in America I've dreamt of, is California. You know, got to go to San Francisco, haven't I? Really, just have to. Just can't not. That's really my fantasy destination.
Well, let's do it then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Tej. Yeah, it'd be lovely to see you next time. Next time? There isn't a next time. What are you on about? Randy.
Hey, Tim.
Hi, Randy.
Hey. If you could send this message back in time to Seeker Tim, would he have had any particular affinity for it?
Depends when. I mean, yeah, just in a story. It depends. Not when he's obsessed with, you know, football and his career as a teacher, and when all he's seeking energy, all the energy of the character was in becoming successful. So successful in sports, successful in career, successful in marriage, being good, you know, being a good footballer, being a good teacher, being a good father, being a good husband. No, I don't think he would have heard it. This can only be heard if it can be heard. You know, there's no point in speaking to people. The vast majority of human beings will not hear a single word of this. It would just pass straight by, you know? So no, I think it was heard when there's, you know, the cliches are, you know, the ripeness of the fruit. That's an old cliched way of speaking about it. I mean, I don't like that because it sounds like a certain amount of time. And of course, there's no telling what fruit is ripe and what's not.
So there's no like Timness that would have resonated with Timness back then.
Yeah, that
I don't know exactly what I'm asking, but it's somewhere in there.
do you know there isn't a Timness? That is me, really. That whole sense of I know Timness, you know Randiness. That's probably not the right thing to say, actually, but because I know that as well. But oh dear. But that sense of knowing, that sense of self-consciousness, self-awareness of knowing yourself, that's what that's the whole illusion. There isn't actually a Timness to know. I don't know myself. The illusion is that you know yourself. Because the whole illusion is I know how I react in certain situations. I know my characteristics. Now, I don't say that I can't speak about that anymore, but there's no sense of it. It's this, I mean, it's very simple, the illusion. It's powerful, but really so simple. The illusion is that I know who and what I am, and I don't, and you don't, but you might still be convinced that you do. This conviction that most human beings have, that they know there is someone who knows the characteristics of themselves. What you might call, for me, Timness. No, there is no Timness, really. It's empty. And for self, that feels dreadful. I don't mind what I fill myself up with as long as I'm fucking full. Self loves to fill itself with misery just as much as it does joy. Failure as much as success. Guilt as much as achievement. So the human beings are much more beautiful when they're all empty. The fullness of each human being is much more apparent when it's not owned. No one has that. Just naturally a human being. I mean, we don't give trees credit for how they grow their leaves, you know, and for their treeness, you know, but treeness is apparent. So what's apparent is humanness. And the wonder is that each human being is absolutely unique. And that's much more apparent when I'm not comparing it with myself. So paradoxically, when there are no selves, when there are no other selves, the uniqueness of each human being and the beautiful uniqueness, the beauty of each human being is much more obvious without the comparison with me. Because it's just obvious. It's just in your face. Human being being human. That's my attempt to speak about that, Randy.
Oh yeah, it wasn't a fully formed question either, but I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks. So, yeah. So that'll still be, it'll only be obvious, it'll only be apparent to others, not to yourself anymore. Because there will be no one aware of that. And yet, you could still speak about it just as you always could. It just won't mean anything. Without self-consciousness, it doesn't mean talking about self is easy. Without a self, talking of the self is so much easier. I mean, most selves find it very difficult to talk about themselves because they're so self-conscious. And it means a lot to themselves. It doesn't actually mean anything.
So there's like some kind of total absolute disconnect. Anything that could be said about a past version of anybody who is a seeker, or you listen to Tony a lot, and I've heard you mention fantasizing about speaking.
Yeah.
It's just a total disconnect is what I'm hearing.
Well, it's not. I can still, you know, I can still talk about, because there's memories of it. But what isn't, what those memories don't have or don't seem to have anymore is that weight of what they mean, the significance of them. They're all insignificant. So memories are just beautiful when they don't mean anything. And I know full well other selves, other human beings with a sense of self will definitely read meaning into them, because that's what self does. Self is the meaning maker. It can't not make meaning out of them and significance out of them, because everything is significant in relation to me. I judge whether it is relevant to me or not. If it's relevant to me, then it's significant. If it has no, it doesn't seem to have any relevance to me, then I just dismiss it as, well, I don't even hear it. It's not a disconnect. There is no one, a disconnect is just the opposite of a connect. So without me, there's no sense of disconnection at all. But there's no sense of connection either. So this, it's hard to convey, but disconnect is definitely not the right word, because disconnect only makes sense if with this sense of connection. And of course, there needs to be separation in order for there to be disconnection or connection. That might sound just like semantics, but what I'm trying to say is there isn't a sense of that at all. There's no sense of feeling connected or disconnected without me. That's all for me. There's no possibility of disconnecting from this. It's all there is. You couldn't detach or disconnect. It's impossible. There aren't any parts to be connected or disconnected. Thanks, Randy.
There's a question in chat. Says, hi Tim. If it is real that you lose a loved one, as you said in one of your talks, if it is real that you lose a loved one, they will never come back, what is the unrealness of it then?
Say that again.
If it is real that you lose a loved one,
Mm-hmm.
that they will never come back,
yeah,
what is the unrealness of it then?
whenever we get into discussions of real and unreal, it's all, you know, which bits are real, which are unreal. It's always tricky, very tricky. In fact, it's almost like a trap, because what some what some humans hear as, some people hear as real, others will say that's the unreal. So for example, so the real for most human beings, ordinary ones, is is material reality, thingness, like human beings, like human bodies. But of course, spiritual people will call that the unreal. That's the illusion, Maya. And the real is the absolute. So depends which way we're coming at it. Are we, you know, which real are we using? Because it can be, I can say it one way, and then, so really there's no real or unreal. Really. No, really, there's no knowing real from unreal. And that's what self always wants to know. I want to know what's real. I always wanted to know. And I didn't want to know what was just real. I wanted to know what's absolutely real. Don't give me the half-cocked, you know, some, you know, cock and bull. Don't fob me off with half-truth. I'm ready for it. I want to know really what's really real. Well, there is no knowing. Isn't it wonderful? There is absolutely, now this is it. I hope you're listening. There is no knowing. I'm sorry, it is funny, because I so wanted to know. And really, this is the crux of self. I wanted to know what's real and what's unreal, so I could know the fucking difference. There is no difference. The real is unreal. The unreal is real, which is just a way of saying there is no knowing real from unreal. Just what seems to be happening. What is going on? Now, you can, if it makes you happier and you're more comfortable, you can say, what's happening? What's happening is just apparent, so that's not real. And what's really happening is nothing happening. That's real, nothing. Or if this makes you happy, if this makes you happier because you like the sound of this better, what's really happening, the appearance is real. The things are real. What's happening is really happening. And the unreal is that it's not happening. It's nothing happening. Now, some of you, one way of saying that appeals, and some of you, it doesn't matter a shit. Because if real is unreal and unreal is real, then that's the end of it. And really all I'm ever speaking about is you won't ask those fucking stupid questions anymore. Because I'm not saying sorry. I don't mean, I'm not being rude to. Who asked the question, sorry?
It was, I'm not sure what her first name is, E. Lily.
Sorry, I'm not meaning you. I just mean everyone, every self that's wanted to know the truth. Because by the way, whether you call it, say, truth and lies, or real or unreal, it's the same. I just want to know really how it is. That was my search. That's what I wanted to know. And I didn't find the answer. And that was the answer. That there isn't an answer. And if there isn't an answer, then the questions simply stop. And so I don't look at anyone else. Now there are plenty of people who would tell you that there's an answer and they know it. And they're the really popular, famous ones, aren't they? Because most human beings want an answer. Well, what if there isn't an answer? How is that? Well, it's much better than there being an answer, because if there's an answer, then some people have got it, and then the other poor bastards are the ones who haven't. And self likes nothing more than that. The smug bastard self loves to have that special knowledge. And really, really, I mean, that's spirituality in a nutshell. This special, unique knowledge. What if all knowledge is empty? What if all understanding is empty? What if all answers are empty? Isn't that love? Isn't that the most beautiful thing you could ever hear? Now, it's not satisfactory because you wanted to know, but it is fucking liberating. It is freedom. It is freedom from the incessant questions, the demanding that well, he knows what I need to know. She knows, she's obviously found the answer. I need her to show me. Please show me. You won't ask anyone ever again to show you anything. Well, other than on a practical level. One thing that you perhaps aren't aware of is this is likely to kill all interest in metaphysics. Dead, stone dead. All interest in philosophy. There's better things to do with your time. There is no time, but there's still better things to do with your time. Because it's all this, the one who would feel much better, which is smug really, about themselves with this precious special knowledge, not turned up. And whoever taught that I couldn't give a shit is much closer to love than that quest for knowledge and understanding. You don't have to say you don't give a shit, you just don't give a shit. You can go, someone tells you their wonderful insight and their great realization and their awakening experience, and you go, oh yeah, that's beautiful, which it is. It's much more beautiful without, because what self is always doing is, how does that compare with mine? I think he might be one step ahead of me. It sounds a bit better than mine. Shit. This constant comparison. So, I don't even know what I'm speaking about.
Philippe has his hand up.
Philippe.
I think, is there still an interest or a pleasure or a love for literature, poetry, arts? Not anymore.
Not really, no. Now, that doesn't mean to say if it just doesn't appear, I can't enjoy it. There can be a real simple enjoyment, but really what I'm speaking about is the going looking for it. That doesn't happen. Having said that, I mean, I never really had that deeper appreciation of poetry or art. I always appreciated sport, and I have to say that's very similar. I've loved watching the tennis. So all I've done since I got back from Asheville is watch Wimbledon. And I probably appreciate and love that more than ever. I've always had a love of physical artistry, you could say, tennis particularly. I adore tennis.
There are some very simple poems like haikus, or which are not teaching but seems to point out directly to this.
Yeah.
And this is my interest to poetry. like hearing to you speaking, it's a little bit like a haiku sometimes.
Sometimes,
There is some gap, and
yeah.
and this is it. Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean. And the thing is, I could still really enjoy that. What doesn't seem to happen is I look for it. So it would have to just appear. It would,
Yeah.
you know, someone would show me it or say, have you seen this? Or it would just appear. And then I could appreciate it or enjoy it. But I don't go looking for it.
Yeah.
But while you're on the subject, why don't I plug that hopefully soon there'll be a book of my quasi haiku poetry,
Yeah.
published on Amazon relatively soon, hopefully.
Yeah, the same for photography. You post photography on Facebook, and yeah, this is simple photography of nature, but it's the same importance for me, your photography and the words below the photography. I don't know. They are very simple and spontaneous. There are no behind. I don't feel a kind of thinking to the structure, to the composition, but there is something conveying about this in your photography.
Oh, thanks, Philippe. I mean, that's lovely to hear, because I post them and really, I don't really know. It's all pretty spontaneous. I mean, it's so I usually write. There's the writing of the poetry or just the words. It's not really poetry. The words just come and I just put them down. And then wherever I am, I take a photograph or I find a photograph that I've taken. Yeah, spontaneous. It's nice to hear that, man. I mean, the most amazing thing is I don't know how anything happens at all. You know, it's no good asking me, you know, how does that happen or how does this happen? And it's just so obvious that, you know, when you say to yourself, you do know how anything happens, it's not true. You can tell a story and that's what it is. A story of explanation. It's not an explanation. It's a story that makes self feel a little bit more comfortable, that it knows what's happening and how it's happening. No one knows how life happens at all. That's the freedom, but I mean, it's scary as shit for me. It's scary as hell. Self says I need to know in order to keep myself safe. Well, there is no you to keep safe. There is no possibility of security. And that is, strangely, without that sense of insecurity, which I am, security is absolutely unnecessary. It's redundant. It was all for me. There is no security.
Because today in psychotherapy, I am quite well trained in late neuroscience application in therapy. And the main point is to increase safety, you know, in the relationship. And but I feel more and more that there are also a huge jail, a prison there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that is the prison.
Yeah.
So, I mean, a great analogy is just how a lot of long-term prisoners, when they're about to be released, are just full of terror, of freedom.
Yeah.
Self does not want freedom.
Yeah.
Self wants security.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a constant effort. It's constant. It's a full-time job for most selves. It's a full-time job to maintain the illusion of security, and just with a few moments of respite when self is absent, really, and they feel wonderful. But equally, self comes back and goes, "Oh, yeah, that was wonderful. But now let's get back to work of keeping safe." Even though it felt the joy, it felt the freedom, the love of just being, very simply, that is still a threat to self. So self would say, "Oh, that was wonderful," but doesn't want it, because the very energy of self, the whole motivation is to keep myself safe.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it is a great paradox that the only security is that there is none. And then if there is no possibility of security, of course, security can't be desired anymore, because it was the whole energy that wanted it was the illusion that it was a possibility.
Yeah.
That I could achieve that. Well, you couldn't. I mean,
I have tried hard to achieve it for during apparently 35 years of psychotherapy. I tried hard. Yeah,
me too. There wouldn't be anyone here who's at the meeting today who hasn't tried hard.
Yeah.
You know, credit where credit's due. Self is a trier. Self tries very hard, you know, and that's why there was a real sense of mourning here for how hard I tried, how hard Tim had tried to be good, to be successful, to be acceptable, to be safe. Thanks, Philippe. Thanks for your lovely, generous words about my my Facebook post.
This question in the chat. Peter says, "Hi Tim, would you say nothing is important at all?"
No, everything is just relatively important, but yeah, absolutely nothing is important. But of course, this isn't a denial of the relative importance of what each human being feels is important. And of course, I mean, there's a lot in common, but each human being will have a unique set of what's important. But it all falls down when it's seen that what we call importance is just what I say is important. Life isn't prioritizing anything, hasn't got any one thing more important than another. It can just be so obvious that every human being is just making that shit up for themselves, and then just goes along to find other human beings who will collude with him and her that is what's important. I was right, or I knew I was right, and I knew they were wrong because they said it wasn't important. I always knew it was. And that's what importance means. Now, when it means that's all it means, and there isn't any essentially important, intrinsically important, then everyone is allowed their own importance. All human beings are just and the other thing that can be undeniable is that no one chooses what's important. You know, what is important to a human being is absolutely choiceless. And again, that feels like unconditional love. So you don't have to agree with anyone to love their sense of what's important, you know, even if vehemently you feel differently. I mean, who would seriously, who would think it's absolutely imperative, of great importance, that everyone should be allowed to carry a gun? I mean, that's properly fucked up. But they're the people who believe that, of course, that's utterly choiceless. They think it really is important. So you won't want to argue when importance is just seen as that, then you won't want to argue that my importance is more important than what you think is important, which is virtually every argument, isn't it? Yeah. I used to be interested in politics. That's dead. Bit like Boris. I just saw it on the news just before I came up.
Dario says in the chat, he likes how you didn't use the word non-duality even once this evening.
Did I not? Well, before we end, let me spoil that. No, it's fine, Dario. There is no non-duality. There would need to be duality for that, wouldn't there? Yeah. All opposites just fall into each other. This doesn't have an opposite. Oh, apart from that. Oh, sorry, that's my non-duality joke. It's not very funny. No, I appreciate you saying that, Derry, because I'd like to call this a different type of meeting other than non-duality. But, you know, we're stuck with it for the time being. Yeah, it's not a great term, is it? Thanks very much for coming, everybody. Thanks, Darren, for your help. And I'm thinking I might have another meeting next week because I didn't have one for 3 weeks. So I'll let you know. And if you're not on the mailing list, I'll email everybody that's on the mailing list. If you're not on the mailing list and you'd like to be, then just email me via the website. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks, Tim.
And
Bye-bye.
yeah, hopefully see you next week.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you. Thanks, Ashfield crew. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, that was awesome.
Stop.